Well, hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us for this online message this weekend for Deep Rivers Church. If you're out of town, and I know some of you are, hope that you're having a good time. If you're not feeling well, hope you bounce back and you're able to join us. I have right here in my hand a yet folded, not yet folded, still unfolded worship guide. On the back of the worship guide has an explanation of some of the things going on. The first thing is tonight, Sunday night, if you're watching this Sunday morning, Sunday night at 6 o'clock, we're having a deep dive class. I think this is number 12. We're looking at the person of Christ. How does it work that Jesus is fully God and fully man at the same time? Was Jesus omniscient? Did he know everything? We know he wasn't omnipresent because he was in the form of a body for 33 years. So it's an interesting conversation. So I hope you could join us. Could Jesus have sinned if he wanted to? That's a pretty controversial thought. Anyways, all right. So tonight, deep dive is at 6 o'clock. Tuesday, we're going on our last Fruit Belt Farm Worker trip. Our last one. If you're able to join us, 4:30 in the church parking lot. We'll be back about 8 o'clock, 8:30. This is also our last chance to deliver hats and gloves and sweatshirts. So if you have any of those items, you need to bring them to the building by Tuesday afternoon. Wednesday's prayer house. Friday is the men's Bible study. Then at 7 a.m. and then a Hearing God studies at 7 p.m. So if you're coming to that. Saturday morning, wherever a full day, there is a deep dive class scheduled for 8:30 on Saturday morning. Again, we're going to do that Sunday night topic on Saturday morning. And then that afternoon is the Family Fun Fall Festival. Everybody is invited, so please come. We need you to bring some chili. We need you to bring some cornhole boards for the game, for cornhole if you got them. Let us know. Shoot us an email, connect@deeprivers.church if you want to get involved. But everybody is invited, so should have a good time. I guess that's it. Yeah, that's everything. All right. Let me get a sip of coffee here. Too hot. We are starting a new sermon series this weekend on the book of James. We're going to walk our way through the book of James, chapter by chapter. You might not know about it, you might not think about it, but James has some controversy to it. Now, some of the Bible is controversial because it has the audacity to make truth claims. Who would have ever known Genesis 1 and God creating men and women would have been a source of controversy. Unfortunately, it is for some folks today. So sometimes the Bible makes a truth claim. The world doesn't like it, so there's a measure of controversy about it. James, whatever controversy it has attached to it, has nothing to do with a truth claim. It has to do with the fact that James famously has a line in here, faith without works is dead. And there were some people, the reformers, who kind of really pushed back on that because they felt like it undermined this idea that we are saved by grace alone, faith alone, grace alone. So it's kind of an interesting thought that the book of James has a little bit of controversy. And I think as we walk through it, you're going to see it's really not that controversy of a thing because when you get a fuller understanding, especially of that one line. So let's just jump right in. We're going to do something we don't do very often. We're just going to read the entire first chapter of the book of James. Now, you're sitting at home or in the car, so you could do that hopefully pretty easily. We'll see how the people do here on Sunday morning. But this is James chapter 1. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, Because the one who doubts is like the wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wild flower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. Take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Well, we have done book reviews before, and I'll admit there's a little bit of a challenge. I think there was 9 paragraphs there that I just read. You could easily get a sermon from each of those paragraphs if you really take a look at it. But we are going to take a moment and just kind of walk our way through, and we're going to really kind of land on some points here. So I hope that this doesn't go too quick for you, and hopefully, that we all walk away with a better understanding of James chapter 1, but also an application of how it can impact us. It starts off saying James, a servant of God. Now, we believe that the James who wrote this book, this epistle, is also the brother of Jesus, technically the half-brother of Jesus. Now, you might not be aware of that, but it's interesting that here, James, who has a connection with Jesus that most people don't, obviously, he's describing himself as a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. He's recognizing that he's a servant to his even biological brother. Now, if it were me, I think I'd be tempted to say, hey, listen up. I'm the brother, and I got a special connection with Jesus, so you need to listen. But here, there's humility. James is calling himself, he sees himself as a servant of God and a servant of the Lord. He's not using that to his so-called advantage of all. And he writes, he says this to the 12 tribes scattered to the nations. We know that to be the 12 tribes, the Jewish nation, the Jewish believers, Jewish believers. So it's a positive thing. I don't know if we tend to think that when the gospel started spreading, it primarily was accepted by Gentile people. But here we see enough Jewish people were accepting Christ as their Savior that they were scattered about. So a letter was written to them. So James goes on. He talks about consider it pure joy when you encounter trials. He says, let perseverance finish the work so that you may be mature and complete. And he says, one who doubts is like the wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. And then he says, such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Now, the first word is whenever. He doesn't say if trials come. He says whenever trials come. Trials are inevitable. We need to maybe have a little bit more realistic of our expectations. In this life, there will be trouble. Jesus said that himself. So if we live our lives always astonished when something wrong happens, it only makes the trial even worse. If we I don't want to say be a pessimist. That's not what I'm saying, but we need to be at realistic expectations of life. We won't be thrown by the trials when we recognize this is part of living in a fallen world. He goes on, perseverance brings maturity. Now, what is perseverance? Perseverance is, I hate to say this, it's not just experiencing the trial. It's not grumbling your way through it. It's persevering through it well, okay? So sometimes we kick and scream and grumble all the way through a trial. I don't know if that's going to bring any maturity in our lives. That doesn't bring growth, but persevering well in it. And when do you need, when you're in a trial, what do you need? You need wisdom. So when you're in a trial, you don't know exactly what to do, and kind of the context of the passage, ask. But ask without doubt, because when you're doubting, you're like a wave in the wind that's tossed to and fro. You never thought about it, but what the problem with the wave is it has no root. It has no foundation, okay? It's just getting tossed around on the bottom of this ocean. The ocean always has a bottom to it, but you don't want to be without a foundation. You want to be anchored to the root. So he says, such a person is double-minded. Now, I'll be honest, when I hear the phrase double-minded, I tend to think of somebody who's trying to walk in two worlds. They got their feet firmly planted in wanting to do God's desires, firmly planted in wanting to please him, but they're also got their other foot in the worldly desires. They're trying to please God and their flesh at the same time. That's kind of my default understanding of double-minded. But here, I think double-mindedness has a little bit of a different feel to it. It's unstable. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. I think a good word for that, unstable, is undecided. That when we are not sure, there's a little bit of us just needs to decide, and we believe this, let's go. So unstable, being double-minded, might not just be trying to please God and please your own flesh at the same time. There's a measure, I think, we need to consider of being a little bit undecided. So we need to make a decision. Do we believe in God or not? And then, choose this day who you're going to follow, sort of thing. All right. The text goes on to say, the rich and the humble. The rich are going to be humbled. The humble will be exalted. Again, it's just another reminder that the world is temporary. But then he also goes on, blessed are those who persevere under trial. That person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. So perseverance allows us our salvation. It brings the crown of life because of our love for God. That's a key. If people want to push back on the book of James because it emphasizes we got to do something with our faith, they need to really take a moment to look at this. It's because we love God. That's why we persevere, because we love him. The reason of our perseverance is our love. So we're told to love him. That's why we persevere. Not just obey, not just believe the right doctrine, not just to serve him, but to do it with the right reason. Because we love him, that's why we're going to do what we're going to do. That's why we will persevere, because of our love for him. So James goes on. Hope I'm not going too fast. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Boy, there's a lot to say on this passage. I know I mentioned before there was an old comedian back in the 70s called Flip Wilson, and his tagline was, "The devil made me do it." And he used that as an example, as an excuse for things. And we need to be careful not to take on that sort of thought that the devil made us do it. No, because this passage says each person is tempted when they're dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. It reminded me of this quote. Well, let me back up. The thought is this: if we're not careful, we tend to underestimate our justification and overestimate our sanctification. Now, what I mean by that is we underestimate our justification. We don't truly understand what it means to have a new identity in Christ, to be pure and holy in his sight. We are justified in his sight, just as if we never sinned. We tend to undervalue that, underestimate that. Conversely, we may often tend to overestimate our sanctification and think, hey, I got it all together. Well, we still are people of flesh, and those desires still can have an influence on us. So sometimes when we sin, it's not the devil made me do it. It might not even be a demonic tempting in your life. It's just your flesh, that's still yet unsanctified flesh, that's enticing you. It reminded me of this quote. There's a famous Tim Keller quote, and he says this: "The gospel is this: we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. And yet at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope." And we need to remember that. We are more loved than we ever dared hope. But the first part of that quote is we are more sinful and more flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. So we need to be careful not to let our guard down and not to think that you are impervious to your flesh, leading you to do different places. So. All right, temptation, obviously desire, it brings enticement, it brings sin. An interesting phrase, it gives birth to death. Let's think about that phrase a little bit. Death, obviously, is separation. That will be hell for those who don't know Christ. But that's a future thing. Then it'll be hell. And I say it's distance now. Separation is eternal separation from God. But even now, and I would dare say even in the life of a Christian, if a Christian is unrepentant in their sin, there's a little bit of a separation. There's a static in that relationship that they have with God. So here's the big question. What is forming your desires? And I like to say this: you are not a victim in forming your own desires. You have a proactive role in fueling them and feeding them. So you're not a victim of your desires. What do you feed? What do you fuel? And you have more control. We have more control over our desires than I think we often realize. James goes on. He encourages us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. He says human anger does not produce righteousness that God desires, and then to get rid of all moral filth. That's quite the phrase, isn't it? Moral filth. Here's a couple thoughts, and I think maybe there is an application for us here. Our anger often comes from being self-centered and not other-centered. Think about the last time you got angry. Now, there's obviously righteous indignation. We can watch the news and have righteous indignation. But when you personally had an interaction with somebody and you got angry, was at the core of it, was it a self-centered thing or an other-centered thing? And my guess is that more often than we want to realize, when we get angry, when we are slow to speak, when we when we're slow to become angry. Lots of times it's not others centered, but it's our own self centeredness that's getting in the way. And again, human emotions often do not produce godly character. In fact, most often they produce the exact opposite. So we need to be careful of our emotions. Emotions are a gift of God. There's no doubt about it. And they can be productive for us to helping us understand what's going on. But we need to be careful that they don't lead us to sinful thoughts and sinful actions, sinful desires. I'm going to reword it just a little bit, but this next paragraph, James says, do not listen to the word and deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like looking at his face in a mirror and then forgetting what they look like. Whoever looks in the law and continues in it, they will be blessed. Now, let me ask you this question. Why do you look in the mirror? Why is it you look in the mirror? I'm going to assume we all look in the mirror at least once a day. Why do you look in the mirror? Now, I got two choices. The first one is you just want to admire what you see, and I hope that's not the case. Well, I hope you like what you see, but if you're looking in the mirror just to admire what you see, there's some vanity there. That's an issue. That's a problem. We look at the mirror because it might help us to adjust something. I had lunch with somebody this week at the Soda Jerk, and I was sitting there in the booth waiting for him, and I thought, I'm going to run to the bathroom and check the mirror. And I walked in there, and the wind had made my hair all crazy, so I was like, I could try to fix this a little bit. So we look at the mirror either to admire ourselves, which is troubling, or to make an adjustment, to think, I got to fix this, I got to fix that. Because the mirror, the image that you see in the mirror, it informs you, it motivates you, and it directs you. It says, it encourages you to be a doer. If I would have looked at my messed up hair and just left it, I would have looked silly sitting there at lunch. It motivates, it gives us direction. So that's what the mirror does. It informs, it motivates, and directs. There's something to be said for that's what God's law does. That's what God's commands do. It informs us, it motivates us, and it directs us to be a doer. Now, the law, again, I think we talked about it last week. You hear the law and you think, that's Old Testament, it doesn't apply. The law in this context are God's desires and his expectations and his commands. Yes, we still have commands. I know us as New Testament believers, we don't always warm up to that idea. Maybe that's why there's pushback on this book of James, because there are commands that we need to be willing to follow, to live in obedience. The text says there is blessings for those who obey. Now here's the trick. How do you define blessings? That's the million-dollar question. How do you define blessings? There's blessings for those who obey God's command. Now the world, I'll oversimplify things, the world looks at blessings as provision, all right? Security, comfort, all those things kind of fall under provision, being comfortable, being secure. So they would see the world and the physical material things that you have as a measure of provision, a measure of blessing. Health would be a second one. You can have all the money in the world, but if you're not healthy, you feel like, there's a blessing that could be had. And the third one is experiences, fun, enjoyment, satisfaction in what we do or what we get to experience. So those are just three basic blessings that the world sees: provision, health, and experience. For believers, our definition of blessing is very, 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 very different. I look at it this way. It's his presence, and it's the peace that his presence gives us. Throughout the ages, Christians have not experienced the blessings of provision, the blessings of health, and the blessings of fun and enjoying experiences. That's just the reality. But what Christians have enjoyed is the blessing of God's presence and the peace that it gives us. That's the blessing. And the presence and his peace, that happens regardless of our circumstances, regardless of our situations. The text goes on, so we need an encouragement that we need to keep the law. All right, so what's the first example in keeping the law? The next thing that said, those who keep a tight rein on their tongues, I misread that. Those who do not keep a tight rein on their tongues have a worthless religion. Religion that our God and Father accepts as pure and faultless. Number one, first, help those in distress. Number two, keep yourself from being polluted by the world. So what would you say comes first? The question is, what does it mean to keep the law? What would you say comes first, and then why and why first? The first suggestion is there's two good answers. The first one is to be careful with what you say. James is encouraging us to be careful about what we say. Why is he making that his first suggestion for us living a righteous life? There's two answers that are pretty good. The first one is, there's power in your speech to damage and to destroy. So we need to be very careful in what we say. I think we need to be very careful in what we type to people, what we text to people, our mode of communication. We need to be careful. There's power in it. And the other thing is that, what we say really does reveal. It discloses, it exposes, it uncovers your heart. The true you pops out in what you say. It is a barometer that can often let people know what's truly going on. Jesus said in Luke 6:45, the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Okay, so we need to be careful in what we say. The last question for this chapter is, is what does God want from us? And it's seen in the other two answers. He wants us to have a heart for others. It's seen in our service to them, to take care of the widows and orphans. This is what pure religion is, to keep a tight rein on your tongue, to look out for the needs of others. The third thing is to have a heart for him, seen in being set apart from the world. The text is not being polluted by the world. So what is pure religion? I know we tend to focus on the widow and orphan one because we can kind of picture that in our mind, but there's a threefold answer. To be careful with what we say. Again, that reveals your heart. It is to have a heart for others, to want to serve others. And the third one is to not be polluted by the world, to live unspotted, uncorrupted, unstained, uncontaminated. You may know that the word holy means set apart. God wants us as his people to be holy, to be set apart, to be different than the rest of the world. Okay? So there's a challenge for us in that. So, well, that is the first chapter of the book of James. And I don't know what things might have resonated with you. I don't have any questions to ponder here at the end. It might be the fact that you find yourself being double-minded. Are you really torn on whether you believe this or not? There's something we said for just deciding. Decide this day who you are going to follow. So that might be on the possibility of double-mindedness. Maybe it's why are you persevering? We persevere because we love him. Maybe that's something that might speak to you. What is your temptation? Or do you feel tempted by things? That might be, it's easy to blame other forces out there, but maybe you're doing something to feed that temptation. How are you doing with your anger? Are you slow to speak and quick to listen? That one might apply to just about everybody. Again, how do you define blessing? You get caught up in the world's definition of blessing. That's easy for us to do. And what are we keeping a good tight rein on our tongues, and are we being careful about what we say? And do we recognize that pure religion is service, but it's also set apartness? It's those two things, serving, but also being set apart and different than the rest of the world. So, all right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us for this online message. Hope all is well. Hope to see you again real soon. If we don't see a deep dive class tonight, hopefully we'll see you Saturday at 1 o'clock for the Family Fun Fall Festival. It'll be a really good time. We'll eat chili. The kids have a bounce house, not for the adults, just for the kids. But we'll have a hayride. You can go on that. And play some cornhole, just hang out with friends. All right. Thanks so much. Take care. God bless.